I remember as a football player and as a coach later on, hating when I'd hear someone from the crowd or even a fellow coach saying something like, hit him, tackle him. Gee, thanks guys, I had no idea that that's what I was supposed to do. Now that you've explained it to me, I can totally do it. I just didn't realize I was supposed to tackle the guy with the ball. This kind of advice, these simple solutions, they pop up in MMA discourse all the damn time. Just do this, problem solved. Well, today we're going to talk about why that's really not the case most of the time, as it turns out things are a bit more complicated than just hit 'em. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are 10 simple fixes to major MMA problems that actually suck. Number 10, safer weight cutting. It's one of the most dangerous aspects of mixed martial arts. It likely causes serious long-term damage to some of the fighters, and it's often considered a massive exploit when someone is able to cut huge amounts and dominate a division full of much smaller fighters. Anytime there's a major miss or somebody stumbles off a scale half dead, the same chorus can be heard. We need to get rid of weight cutting. This is stupid. Why are we allowing this? And if it's not that, you'll inevitably hear that one championship has solved this problem. And while of course I agree that it needs to be fixed, it's not that simple. First of all, how do you actually stop weight cutting? One suggestion has been same-day weigh-ins. But have you considered how much of a problem that would be? Because even if a fighter isn't cutting major weight, they're still very likely having to cut something, meaning their hydration levels are probably much lower than they should be before going into a violent cage fight where their brain can be even more negatively impacted because of the lack of fluids in their system. And then you'll say, well, we'll do hydration tests same day. But again, if you have to cut a little bit of weight to make that class, that could lead to a ton of misses on every single card. The day of the card. I mean, that's a disaster. And as far as one championship system goes, many larger and more authoritative voices than mine on the matter have pointed out that the promotion is very reluctant to share their data on that program. And so we don't really know its effectiveness at this point. Weight cutting is built into the culture of wrestling and thus combat sports. It's going to be very difficult to eliminate that, and all the simplest solutions aren't really so simple. Number 9, eye poke proof gloves. It's a tale as old as John Jones. Name a high profile fight that has either been severely disrupted by an eye poke and or a fighter does several of them over the course of a bout, resulting in damage that would appear to have given said fighter an advantage, and you'll hear Joe Rogan, if he's calling the fight, talking about one of two things. They didn't have this problem in Pride, and or Trevor Whitman has come up with a new design that completely negates the issue. And those two popular ideas you will see parroted on social media. But this isn't a new problem, and these aren't new solutions. As far back as over a decade ago, White has been on the record about the UFC looking into new glove designs. And Whitman's Onyx gloves were even brought to White & Company to look at, a design that apparently everybody was very impressed by, as it curves the fingers inward but isn't too limiting on grappling, which of course is a major concern. And it's said that these gloves might also help prevent handbrakes. The problem came after the meeting. The truth is, this is never going to change if the UFC doesn't change, and as a brand, those gloves, the UFC glove, that's a major part of their identity. So in order to change that to something new, Whitman explained that the promotion's legal representation wanted to own the patent, a sticking point that they apparently could not come to terms on. Then there's the matter of the commissions, who would all have to approve of this new glove across the board in any location the UFC fought. And while it's true that the UFC presenting a glove for competition would go a long way to sway Nevada and others, if you've ever seen any equipment changes or modifications brought up at a commission hearing in the past, it's not exactly an easy process to convince them. And that's not even to mention that we haven't seen these gloves tested on a large scale and don't know what issues would arise during live fights at the highest level. I'm not saying there isn't a solution, I'm saying this whole process is a lot more involved than let's just use the good gloves. Number 8, truly unified rules. This is never ever gonna happen. Not anymore. Now that there's a riff, that there's issues about what a downed opponent is, and a few other minor changes, that's it. We will never have truly unified rules ever again. In fact, they're only going to get further from each other until we break off into new sports like the Great Schism of the Church in 1054. I'm maybe being a little bit dramatic there. But the point is, all of these separate sanctioning bodies would have to agree to the exact same guidelines all across the board to get the rules all back to the same. And good luck getting that to happen. How could it even happen? They're not all meeting together. Sure, there might be representatives at the ABC, but that's not the same. The states aren't having these dialogues together. They have their own bodies. And so the inevitable idea of a federal or national commission does come up in this conversation. But how does that work? Are we saying that the federal government would need to do something like the Ali Act? Even that didn't mandate a federal association, but suggested a centralized entity. The ABC is a not-for-profit that formed on its own. It's not a US government organization. So getting a centralized body together that would supersede the rulings of each individual state's commissions would not be easy. And that's the kind of authority that would be needed to unify the rules again, meaning the simple solution to this problem is probably never coming, and it's not all that simple. Number 7, better matchmaking. Whenever Conor McGregor comes off a 4-year hiatus and ends up competing for a title, or the UFC just makes up a belt, be it an interim one or a themed championship, only for a champion or top contender to get screwed over in some way, we all say the same thing. Well, that's bullshit. It just made that title because they needed something to sell this pay-per-view, and how the hell does that guy deserve that fight? This should be fairer. This should be better. The UFC shouldn't just be able to make whatever fights they want on a whim. What good are the official rankings if they don't use them? Which is all true and all fine, but what is the actual solution? The Ali Act in boxing essentially forced the major organizations to make official ranking systems, but there's no central body that has authority over those rankings. They can only make suggestions. They all have their own system, and it's still a massive mess. It can still be manipulated and exploited. It's not as simple as the number one guy fights the number two guy. And the official UFC rankings have long been looked at in a negative light by fighters and fans alike. So that system would need improvement as well, but what exactly does that mean? How would you do that? If we go the Ali Act route, that means a central governing body would likely have to be made, otherwise it would be just like boxing is now. But such an entity might mean that each promotion's rankings and titles would likely be exchanged for a world title under that body. And with as ridiculous and biased as the UFC's matchmaking can be, it does also allow for a lot of flexibility in events that we see today. Now, of course, fighters should have way more say in the process, and you don't want people being exploited. But the point is, this sport that we don't have a playoff system for will always have subjective rankings, will always have matchmaking issues, and making everything fair and good isn't as easy as it would appear. Almost every solution feels like a giant mess. Number 6, changing the 10-point must system. It's a thing we adopted from boxing as the sport surged towards better regulation, and at the time it made a lot of sense. We didn't really have a way of doing this yet, and so boxing, a fellow combat sport, tried and true, they use a 10-point must system. Let's go with that. Well, since the early unified rules were implemented, many an observer has pointed out that it kind of sucks. Almost all rounds just get scored 10-9. And while there has been verbiage altered in recent iterations of the rules to promote more liberal use of 8 points, the other issue is that most fights are just 3 rounds. So if you did have a really bad one, now you're fighting a major uphill battle. Is that really fair? It's something that comes up almost any time there's issues with scoring or judging or what have you. We always talk about just get rid of it. But what is the actual solution? What are we replacing it with? Would that subjective system not have the same issues? Pride FC judged fights on a whole, but that's no perfect way of doing it. There's issues there too. Not to mention, good luck getting all the different sanctioning bodies in the sport on board with a new system anyway. Minor changes are hard to implement, forget an overhaul. That's nearly impossible. Not to mention, this new system, it might have flaws. It would need to be tested first on a smaller scale. And then there's open scoring, which I myself have advocated for on this channel. But again, that's a whole other massive issue that hasn't been tested enough. We don't know how it would affect the judges, the crowd, the fighters. It's easy to say that the 10-point must system isn't perfect, but there's still no clear solution as to how to fix it. Number 5, better event start times. I think everybody complains about this unless you live on the west coast of the United States, but I think we all agree that all of them can go fuck themselves. I kid, but seriously though, start times for cards are something almost all of us at one point or another have wished would change. As an ESTer myself, I hate how damn late a main card starts for the UFC. 10 p.m. I should be getting ready for bed. Why do I have to stay up till 2 a.m. to finish watching the post-fight presser? And invariably, when I do take to Twitter to complain about this, my friends across the pond are quick to point out how fucked up their lives are now because they're MMA fans. All of them living their lives like Robert Pattinson's Batman, just dark circles under their eyes, pale and brooding. It's something we all say, fix the start times. But what is the fix? Let's say that they do start earlier. How much earlier? If a UFC card starts at 7 p.m. EST, that's 4 o'clock on the West Coast. On a Saturday, most people are doing stuff around that time. If I had a life or friends, I know I would be. And what about the UK crowd, which is huge now? Would the UFC benefit from catering to them slightly so that they could then charge a premium for watching the sport? Whereas now it's like, well, yeah, you have to watch it at 5 a.m., so don't worry about that $80. But how would that affect the other markets? There's also been major growth in Asia. Europe, of course, is a hotbed for the sport. They have deals to do shows in Abu Dhabi. There's a million strings to be pulled in any given direction should the UFC change their start times. And while I don't have the data that says what region specifically watches the most or what time would be the most favorable, I would imagine the UFC and ESPN have nailed down a balance that works for them financially, even if it doesn't work for all of us. I think the real solution is everybody just watch it when they want. Fuck live sports. I'm just kidding. Taped sports are like burnt pizza. Yeah, it's pizza, but this sucks. Number 4, expanding the moveset. It's something a bunch of us say whenever we're pissed about stupid rules messing up fights. They should just let them do knees to downed opponents. It's too complicated. 12 to 6 elbows. They thought of this because of board breaking nonsense. Why is it still part of the rules? Pride had soccer kicks. Why can't we? Well, like all the topics on our list today, it's super easy to just say allow this stuff without considering how difficult that would actually be to implement. First, as we've discussed with the unified codified rules, good luck getting everybody on board for any of that stuff. Even if you did get a body as major as Nevada to agree to expanding these moves back into the sport, there would be so many commissions that were just not okay with it. So you didn't really solve the problem, you only made things more complicated, as fighters are going to have to remember in what state they're allowed to punch somebody in the face mid-fight when they're just running on training and instinct. The other issue, and I get that 12 to 6 elbows are dumb, but all of these things we want back in the sport, they were regulated out because somebody thought they were too violent, too dangerous. And so the commissions, polite society, they weren't on board with it, which means if you brought them back, there would be controversy, something these sanctioning bodies do not want, and so a lot of them would just say, nah, we're good. It would be great to say, yeah, just let all this stuff happen again, but the actual implementation of it at this point would be a nightmare worse than what we currently have. Number 3, better officials. Oh man, this is a huge one. We see this all the damn time. That ref sucks, get rid of him. These judges are garbage. Why don't we have better judges? Just get new ones that don't suck. That's great advice, sounds fantastic. How do we do that? First of all, judging, it takes time to learn, it takes time to do, it takes time to get good at, and there's not a lot of money in it. According to CSAC, judges make $550 when they judge fights at shows that have a net gate of $100,000 or more, and $300 if the show is a smaller one. So you're getting $600 from the state per fight. That's not exactly rolling in the dough. And that's the other thing. The people you think are more qualified to do this, former fighters, coaches, analysts, whatever, they're all very likely doing something else in MMA right now that pays them better cash, or they've moved on from the sport. So why in the world would they want to become a judge, get paid less, and everybody hates them for everything they do? If there's a close fight, it doesn't matter how you score it, everybody hates you. And that's not even factoring in, if we did have these former fighters and coaches and such, the MMA world is one big fucking high school. Everybody knows everybody. It would be damn near impossible to get judges without a ton of built-in bias. How do you train them to be better? If the judges suck today, and they've been doing this for forever, what makes you think that the new judges could do a better job, and who is it that's teaching them? Same thing goes with referees. It takes a ton of time and effort to get to the level of a Herb Dean. There's not a huge market out there willing and able to get to that level. It's super easy to say judges suck, refs suck, replace them. But the reality is that it's going to be a lot harder to do that than just putting new bodies in. Number 2, better fighter pay. We hear Jake Paul talk about it all the time. It's one of the hot topics of our day. Pay the fighters more. It's simple, right? The fighters deserve more money, give them more cash. Well, as journalist John Nash once said in an interview with Jimmy Smith on this exact topic, the MMA fans, they love easy solutions and they love charismatic people. It's great to say that the fighters need to be paid more, but so many people just gloss right over how difficult that is to actually implement. Yeah, sure, it would be wonderful if Ari Emanuel held a press conference tomorrow and was like, you know what? We've decided that we're just gonna start giving all the fighters more money now. We did it, guys. We helped the fighters by just saying that they need more money. And let's talk about Jake Paul for a second, apparently the savior of our sport. He's always talking fighters unions. He's coming up with all these schemes. He made a diss track about Dana White where he was gonna split the video up into NFTs and then the profits were gonna go to the fighters. By the way, as far as I could find, that never happened. And then there was his investment to Endeavor itself, which was supposed to somehow change things from the inside out, which I explained in detail on Twitter that day, why that's literally impossible, and I'm sure Jake knew that. It's fun to rally behind the big voices saying change fighter pay, but without real solutions, all of which are incredibly complicated, the antitrust lawsuits, potential expansion of the Ali Act, some sort of fighters association, there's never going to be any change no matter how many times you like Jake Paul's tweet. Speaking of fighter pay, let's talk about number 1, a fighters union. It's long been heralded as the solution to any issue like fighter pay or the fairness of MMA contracts, matchmaking, you name it. It's truly an end-all be-all. Just organize and that's it. You win, the fighters have their say. Everybody is happy, it's so simple. If a few big names at the top would stop being so selfish, they could all make this work. The problem with that is the long history we have now of this issue being far more complicated than this very common sentiment we hear. There have been several major attempts at creating a fighter organization that would actually have say as an entity, and every single time it's fallen apart. Jeff Boris, this massively famous baseball agent and lawyer, he had a full-on media blitz a few years back with his Professional Fighters Association that was gonna get organized and change the game. It fell apart so fast, fighters didn't trust it, the whole thing was a mess. Then who could forget when Bjorn Rebney came around with the MMAAA? That was backed by guys like GSP. Failed at launch, essentially. Leslie Smith has been trying to organize for years, and then it's not even just as simple as getting everyone together. What type of association would this be? What equivalent bodies should they emulate? The NBA? Some experts think that the PGA is actually a more fitting model. And then there's the issue of whether this is getting taken taken up on a federal level, where union laws would then have to be considered, versus an agreement between the UFC and a fighter entity? And what would that agreement look like? There would have to be give and take. It's a super complex issue, and just saying, well, they should get together doesn't really do the topic much justice. Big thank you to Ben Rosette, who provided that sweet tune you heard in the intro. Check out his music by clicking the link in the description, and go give him a follow on his Instagram and Twitter page at Ben Rosette. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe. We've got 3 new videos or more for you every single week. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments below. Follow On Point MMA on Twitter, and have yourself a wonderful day.